Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment Part 3, and this is session number 31. Now, as we get ourselves going, what I want to do is I want to emphasize to you just how essential sonship establishment is. And I'm just going to take a minute to talk about this because it would be easy, and I'm really saying this, you've gone through everything up to this point, and I'm really saying this for folks that are watching on the DVDs. Because for them, it would be easy for them to try to skip over this stuff and move straight into something over in Romans 12. And I want to tell you that the curriculum is not built that way. That your establishment is essential, and I'll tell you why. Because everything you're going to learn is going to be built on the foundation that's laid here in Romans 8. It's going to actually stem out of these things in Romans 8. That's the connection that's going to hook it all together. And if somebody bypasses this and just jumps over into the education somewhere, not only are you going to have that gap in your understanding, but you're not going to see the connection with how you were supposed to be established in this thing. There's going to be problems. And you can no more skip this and move ahead to something else than you can build the walls and the roof of a house without first laying a foundation. There has to be something to set all that on. And so in your notes, I actually talked about that in a couple of ways, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about that, but there's somewhere you're heading, and what we're doing right now is essential to getting there and having the understanding that your Heavenly Father intends for you to have. And if you think about it, folks, everything you do requires groundwork. If you want to read and write, at some point prior to that, you have to learn the alphabet. It's basic. It doesn't seem like you're doing much, but knowing the letters and how they combine and how you use them, that's what enables us to actually have a written language. And we kind of take those things for granted. There are areas of the world where missionaries have gone where there is no written language whatsoever. And so what they have to do is they have to actually develop a written language and then teach people to read so that the Bible can be of some use to them. And the same is true in numbers. If you're going to do any kind of math, at some point in your life, somebody had to teach you the numbers and how they relate to each other. It's very basic, and I understand that. And everybody wants to get over and let's start, doing math. But you got to know something before you can get over and do that. Same thing is true here. That's the only point that I'm making. And so I just want to make sure that folks that are following along are going to do what you've done. You're going to move through this in a very orderly fashion, because if you've come to this place and you've skipped the things that have gone before, today what I'm asking you to do is go back and don't miss those things, because they are foundational. That's why we're calling it sonship establishment. There's a groundwork that's laid in that. Okay, now let me pick up where we left off in our last session. And what I want to do is I want to talk to you just for a moment, very quickly. I want to reiterate. I don't know why I'm doing that. I'm going to reiterate the points that I was making to you about Psalm 44, because I changed some things on that last time. I gave you something different than I had kind of given you in the week prior, and I just want to make sure we've got that nailed down. So here it is. Number one, on the timeline, Psalm 44 refers to the time when the nation of Israel was being scattered at the Babylonian captivity, the start of the fifth course of punishment. The reason that's important for me to mention again is because prior to that, I had talked to you like this was them being out in the day of wrath and being treated as sons. That's not the case. I went to pains last week to demonstrate that to you. Number two, the psalm records the complaint because God was not intervening in the physical circumstances of their lives. Remember, they were talking about, oh, you used to do this, and now none of that is happening anymore. All right? Number three, verse 22 which is the verse that the Apostle Paul quotes in Romans 8, is a summation of their attitude toward the tribulations that have come upon them. Now, and let me just give you that verse again. Yea, for thy sake we are killed all the day long, we are counted as sheep for the slaughter. That's the attitude they had. That's the way they were looking at it. And Paul is going to come along and correct that attitude. As a matter of fact, number 4, the sufferings of the first part of the 5th course of punishment were not the sufferings under Satan's policy of evil. Everybody understands that. What was that? Well, I think I've got it in the next thing. The sufferings were the prophesied curses which God told them would happen if they persisted in rebelling against them. Remember, He laid all of that out in Leviticus 26 and told them, if you rebel against me, here's what's going to happen. And that's exactly what did happen. That shouldn't have taken them by surprise at all, because in their day, there was a number of prophets that were actually warning them that this was about to happen. You're going to be carried away captive out of the land. Your enemies are going to succeed against you. Your cities are going to lie desolate. Isaiah was a 5th cycle prophet. Ezekiel, all those guys were taught. Of course, Ezekiel was over in that, but they had warnings about that. Jeremiah warned them about that before it ever took place. And so did Isaiah. So they had the Scriptures and they had the prophets, and they should have known. And then lastly, number 6, therefore, Psalm 44 is not about sons suffering under the policy of evil, but it is about the complaint of the Jewish nation when they were scattered among the heathen. Now, the only reason that I bring that up is because that gets us in a frame of reference that I want you to get to, because when Paul quotes that, he's quoting their attitude. That's all summed up in verse 22. It's like they've listed all of these things, and now they're saying, you know what, we're just being killed all the day long. We're accounted as sheep for the slaughter. It's just sort of wrapping up how they feel about that. So, let's pick it up now in Romans 8, where Paul quotes that verse. As it is written, for thy sake, as it is written, referring back to Psalm 44, for thy sake we are killed all the day long, we are counted as sheep for the slaughter. And just to remind you, verse 36 comes right on the heels. Remember what verse 35 was? It was the list of the 7 attacks. Remember? Tribulation and distress and persecution, all the way to sword. Those 7 categories of suffering that a son or daughter can go through because of their sonship. And so when he gets through listing those 7, he quotes that thing out of Psalm 44 as if to say, this is their attitude, but he's going to correct that attitude. Now, before I take you back into verse 37, there's a couple of things that we didn't touch on. I want to do that quickly. And in fact, I told you we would do this today. The first one is when it says, for thy sake. And I need to talk about the word sake, because sake can mean 3 different things. Number 1, it can mean there's a purpose or there is a motive. All right? Number 2, for someone's sake means it is for their good or for their advantage. If you do something good for somebody, you've done it for their sake. And number 3, personal benefit or interest. You can do something for your own sake. Now, those are the 3 ways in which the word sake gets used. So when you look at Psalm 44, verse 22, or when you look into Romans chapter 8 and verse 36, you have to realize, what you have to be able to say, which way is God using this word? How am I supposed to understand for thy sake? Now, let me call something to your attention here. In Psalm 44, those people who are enduring those tribulations, they're not doing the affliction, they're being afflicted. And the fact that they are, and maybe I should back us up to take a look at that again. In fact, I can do it right here. As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Now we're going to do that next verse in just a moment. But what I'm after here is to show you this. Those folks were not saying, they didn't say, we're enduring the sufferings for your sake. Do you notice that? What they said is, something is happening to us. And I'm going to tell you that my understanding of that, let me back you back up, is because there's a purpose or a motive behind what was happening to them. Didn't God tell them this is what was going to happen? He did. And why would God bring those things on the nation of Israel? Because when they rebelled against Him and got away from Him, this was God's way of bringing them back. That's the purpose behind it. That's the motive behind it. And so that's what the sake is about. In other words, the fact that they're undergoing those things, now I'll take you back to that verse again, the fact that they're undergoing those things means that God has a purpose behind that. Does that make sense? So as long as you can see that, I think we've got this in the very context that we're supposed to see it. And now, look how Paul turns that thinking around. In verse 36 it says, as it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long, we are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. First word in verse 37 is nay. Now I mentioned that to you in our last session, but what I didn't do, and I also told you I would do, is that the word nay actually comes from two Old English words. And though the first word is N-E, and these two words have a meaning, and when you put them together, the last word is E-I. Now, if you put that together, N-E-E-I, in almost every language of the world, you know what they would do? They would drop one of those vowels, because vowels don't go together. I'll just give you an example. In French, you have the word the, it's either L-E or L-A, because every noun in French is either masculine or singular. La table, that's L-A, that means the table is feminine. We have one word, I love English, the. It doesn't matter, it's just the. And we don't change the spelling of the for that. But if it's L-E, and then the baby, les enfants, they don't say L-E-E-N. They take that E out, and they put that apostrophe in there, and then they put the two together and make a contraction out of the word. L'enfant. That's how they would do that. Now, same thing with this. You wouldn't put those two E's together. Those are two words, and when they're put together, they would be N-E-I. That's how it would be, and that word eventually became that word in the English language. But let me show you what these two words mean. This word means not. That's not hard to see, is it? The N-E, I mean that it's close to that. And the E-I means ever. When you say nay, you're not just saying no. It is a much stronger word than that. And what you're saying is not ever. This is never going to be the... And look what it follows in verse 36. For thy sake we're killed all the day long, we're accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Paul immediately reverses that by saying, not ever. Don't think that. In all these things we are more than conquerors. The mindset is not about being sheep that are appointed for slaughter. The mindset is about being more than a conqueror. So that's a much stronger word than the word no. And by the way, I did a little work on this. You realize the Bible does use the word no over 1,000 times. It uses the nay much, much less. In fact, less than 50 times. And so when you look at the word nay being... By the way, you've already run into that in the book of Romans. Let me just give them to you real quick. Romans 3:27. Where is boasting then? It's excluded by what? By what law? Of works? Nay. But by the law of faith. Remember, he's talking... This is back in your justification. You're not ever going to be justified before God by your works. So, you know, he's not just saying no. He's saying Not ever. That's never going to happen. And then the other one that you've already seen is in Romans 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. There's a strong answer to that. And then he follows it with, nay. And then there's a comma that sets that off. I had not known sin but by the law. Paul was saying, not anything wrong with the law itself, in and of itself. The problem is what? Yeah, you can't perfectly keep the law. That's the problem. And so if you're going to try to utilize the law to be justified, you're never going to be justified. Okay. Well, anyway, I just wanted to show you that what Paul is saying here by use of the word nay, which we have already seen a couple of times in the book of Romans, is to, in the strongest possible way, to reverse your thinking. And I'm just going to sum it up like this. The Apostle Paul is saying, don't even think that you're a sheep appointed to slaughter. Because if that's your thinking, what is that going to lead you to? Discouragement and despair? That's not what he's trying to get across here. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. And so let me take you back now to verse 37. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors. Now, in the past, I have already told you some things about what it means to be more than a conqueror. But I haven't told you everything that should be said about that. And by the way, that in all these things, can anybody tell me what these things are a reference to? Exactly right. That list of things that was given up in the previous verse. Okay. Now, I tell you, this is going to be great today. We're going to see some things I think is going to really thrill your heart. But looking at this part of the verse, we are more than conquerors. That is a conclusion that, or that's something that Paul's saying to you. That, okay, let me just say it like this. You know the Bible has a sense and sequence to it. If you're really going to study the Bible, the way to do it is not to jump around all over it, but to really start at Genesis 1:1 and begin to work your way through the Bible. And if we had done that, and we had gotten up to Romans 8, and we had gotten to verse 36, when you got to verse 36, you might have thought this: okay, these tribulations are going to come on me. The policy of evil is going to try to get me to quit my sonship. And you may have said to yourself, but I'm just going to stick in there. I'm going to endure it. I'm going to stick it out. You may have said that. You may have even said, well, I think I can be victorious no matter what Satan does. You might have even said that. Or you might have done like Israel did in Psalm 44 and said, well, we're just sheep appointed to slaughter. You might have said that. But what you are told is something that we would probably have never come up with on our own. Because right on the heels of being told about those 7 categories of attacks, and then that mindset that, oh, we're just sheep appointed to slaughter, he turns around and says, nay, in all these things we are. And if you had just read the verse up to there, and then you didn't see the rest of the verse, I wonder how we would have filled that in. Nay, in all these things we are. Well, the nay would tell you you got to go somewhere different than we're sheep appointed to slaughter. But I wonder how. But here's what I'm saying: you and I probably would not have said we're more than conquerors. We might have said, I believe we can still have victory. You might have said that. But I don't think we would have said this, because this sounds way over the top unless you really understand what your Father is doing with all of that. And so I do think that we have to talk for a minute about what it means to be more than a conqueror. Now, does anybody remember what we've already said about this? The essence of what it means to be more than a conqueror? Let me tell you why this is important for you to know. This is not... Oh, that is really good. In fact, you stole my thunder. Thank you, Linda. Okay. Okay, that was sarcastic. Thank you. Okay, I'm just saying. Okay, okay. Praying for you, Eric. Okay. Okay. Look, you know what? Everybody listening on the DVD who knows who you are, they're all laughing right now. Yeah, they're loving it. There's a couple of things about this. The first thing is to be more than a conqueror. Now, let's use Linda's first, because that is true. You know what it means to be a conqueror. What does that mean? Okay, to be victorious, all of those things are right. Yes. If you're going to be more than a conqueror, now the word more is telling you this exceeds just being victorious. This goes beyond that. So to be more than a conqueror, remember, well, you have to know something here, and I know you know it, and Linda knows it because that's why she answered the way she did. When you go through these attacks, those things, well, I'm not going to be able to reverse them. I got to do the first one first. The things that are that which is against us works for our benefit. What are those attacks geared to do? Make you quit your sonship life. Do you know what those things are actually going to do? Instead of being detrimental to you, they're actually the power in this book, the power in the sonship curriculum, is going to take those attacks as they happen to you and actually turn them around for your benefit. Yes. And they're going to equip you in ways you couldn't be equipped without them. That's why your Heavenly Father is not getting between you and those attacks. But He is not just leaving you out there on your own. He's actually taking those things and working them to your benefit. But what does He mean? When I say to your benefit, does that mean, oh, so when you're attacked, you're going to get an unexpected check in the mail? Is that the kind of benefit that we're talking about? What are we talking about? Yes, it's going to benefit you as a son. And that leads us to the part that Linda talked about. Those attacks accelerate your sonship. Where you're trying to go, what you're trying to get done, they actually accelerate. Now, I sat in Ruby's house when Wanda was still alive, and we went over some things. And I tried to explain to Wanda, and I think she really understood quite a bit of that. But I explained to Wanda that a right response to what she was going through was going to result in I kind of called it a bump in her. You know, when you're running for office and you're looking at the polls and something good happens, a guy gets a bump in the polls, you know, everything goes up. Well, you kind of get a bump in your sonship. And for you, I'm going to use this word. Those attacks accelerate your sonship. It's almost like somebody pushed on the gas pedal. And now all of a sudden, you're moving forward faster than you would have ever moved forward without that. It's not that you can't move forward, you can. Does everybody kind of understand what I'm saying about that? Okay. Now, because of that, and so that's the one that Linda was talking about, and that's part of the more. That's part of the more than conquerors. It's not just that you're being victorious, you are. It's more than, you know, I'm not defeated. It's more than that. It is now the benefit that you're going to get through these attacks is actually going to make you a better, stronger, more experienced son. Now, here's the next question. When does that benefit come into play? Oh, y'all are really good. Y'all got this. That benefit comes in now. How does it benefit you now? Huh? Yeah, you become a stronger son or daughter of your Heavenly Father. You get some experience under your belt, and you know how to handle things. And you know what? And that makes you someone that can turn around and help somebody else, doesn't it? That's exactly right. Now, and it also is going to affect you later. How does it benefit you later? Judging angels. It's your position. Now, no, I'll wait and talk about that later. In the second half today, I know that's very interesting to you, and I promise I didn't take very much, just a scant mention of it is all I did. But I know that one of the things that you all are wondering about is, can you tell us more about those positions that we're going to hold in the heavenly places when we get up into the creature? And today, I'm going to pull back the curtain just a little bit and talk about some things we have never talked about up to this point. But I just want to show it to you. We're not going to study. We're not going to run off on a rabbit trail. Although I even admitted in the notes, I am dying to do that. But I'm not, first of all, going to die. The second one is, I'm not going to go off on the rabbit trail because, but I thought I'd give you some verses that if you want to go look at those on your own, you would be able to do that. We will have opportunity to do detailed work on that, but I don't want to do that today because I'm really trying to get down the trail here in Romans 8. It is the effectual working of the doctrine, what you're learning right now, when that effectually works in you, and you're going to ask the question in your mind, how do I know if this thing has worked in me or not? There's a checkpoint sitting here in Romans 8, and we're going to see it today. And if you can answer this checkpoint, that's how you know what's being written here has worked in my inner man. That's going to be the way for you to know that. So we'll go through that. And by the way, you won't answer any of that out loud or in front of people. This is really something that you're going to go home and talk to your Heavenly Father about. And that's really how that's supposed to work. But the effectual working of this doctrine has the power to take the worst things the adversary can do and turn them around and make you a better son because of it. That's the other element of being more than a conqueror. And if you're delivered from anything, it won't be from the attack. But what will you be delivered from? Yeah, the effect. What Satan wanted to accomplish in that attack, that's the part you'll be delivered from. It's got to be frustrating if you're the devil looking at a son who's really wanting this, because every time you try to do something to make them quit, it accelerates them as a son. Don't you know, that's got to be pretty discouraging. I can't say I'm disappointed about that. But if you're, you know, but that's kind of like, well, okay. Anyway, we'll just leave that right there. And you know, that really ought to make perfect sense to you, because remember, Satan can't really start those individualized attack against you until you're well over into the education for being a simple son. And it's the things, and by the way, I want to say this too, because I don't want you to get confused. When you read up there in all these things, we are more than conquerors, I do not expect any of us to be able to look at that phrase and say, oh, I know exactly how that's going to work. In fact, if you're looking at that right now and saying, okay, I see that my Father has said that we're going to be more than conquerors, but I don't understand how that's really going to work for real. Because if the policy of evil takes me through tribulations or persecution, how in the world, I mean, I understand it could do that, but I just don't understand how that's really all going to sort itself out. But you're not being asked to understand that here, because this is not the education. This is you being told about something and expected for you to know this is what the education will produce. It's just like a professor standing up in front of his class and saying, at the end of this course, here's what you'll be capable of. He didn't tell you anything about it. He's just telling you this is where you're going. And with your Father, you now have one of two responses to that. You're either going to look at that and say, I don't believe that, or you're going to look at that and say, wow, I believe it, and that's great. I don't know how it works, but if He said it, I believe it. And that's what you're being talked about. That's the thing, because I don't want you to look at this right now and say, well, I have to tell you, if I was suffering famine and nakedness and peril, I'm not really sure how it would respond to that to be more than a conqueror. Fair enough. But have you gotten the doctrine that enables you to do that yet? No. This isn't, or if you had of, guess what? You'd be in the education, not an establishment, right? So all this is doing is preparing you to believe something, to give you comfort for this. I started to say this a while ago. I think Milt said something a minute ago that made me remember this, and so now I'm going to just bring it up. The reason these are important is because you're going to draw on what you're learning right here today. You're going to draw on that over and over again. You're going to, when something's happening, you're going to look back and you're going to say, in all these things we are more than conquerors. And you're going to draw on that. Because that's the reality of it, but it's what you're going to have to remember. You know what? That when you get to Romans 12:1, right, there is going to be a renewing of your mind. And if you, give me another way to say that. The renewing of your mind? It does. It does. But if your mind is being renewed, yeah, you're thinking differently. And that's the whole thing that this is after. Instead of looking at it and going, oh, poor me, I'm a sheep for slaughter, you're going to be thinking differently, and you're going to be going, wait. I am more than a conqueror. I'm benefiting by this, both now and in eternity. Okay, so let me give you a summation now of verse 37. Here it is. Nay, that means do not ever start thinking that the attacks against you are making you a sheep appointed to slaughter. In all these things, that refers to everything the policy of evil can use against you. Notice it says in all these things, not from all these things. You're not being shielded from these things. Everybody get that? That preposition's important. Thirdly, oh, this is a long one. Just read it to you. We are more than conquerors, which means more than we are victorious. A conqueror is one who has defeated an enemy, but we are more than that. Being more than a conqueror means that the very things used against us result in our benefit and advancement as sons, conforming us to the image of God's Son. That means that the more than conquerors concept not only pertains to us now as sons engaged in the education, but also in eternity future when we are out in the creature. The more is also a reference to the eternal benefit that we gain by utilizing the curriculum to handle the attacks of the policy of evil. Didn't we talk about all of that? So, that's easy to see now, right? And that's kind of what ought to be in your mind about that. The next part of the verse is, through Him. Now, we didn't talk about that yet, so I'll just talk about it here in this summation. Through Him, the Him is God the Father. Does anybody not see that? We are more than conquerors through Him that loved us, all right? Since it is through Him, this tells us that being made more than a conqueror is not something that you and I are going to manufacture. It is something that I talked about, we're not just going to keep a stiff upper lip. We're going to do the best we can. We're going to soldier on, all that kind of business. But this is accomplished through Him. That means He's made a provision for this. It's not up to us. Thank God for that, huh? Yeah. And then the sentence could have ended there, couldn't it? I mean, it could have said, we are more than conquerors through Him. End of sentence. Would have made perfect sense. Why tag on that last phrase? I haven't given it to you yet. So why tag that on? Through Him that loved us. You know He loves you. Why tag that on? Yeah, okay, so here it is. That loved us. Which is contextually the love that God has for a son or daughter, right? It's not, I love you as a sinner and I want you to be saved. This is someone who is saved. That's a son or daughter who's now being established as a son or daughter. And that's the love of someone who is engaged in the sonship education. It is that love that has made the provisions for our success. Remember, we're more than conquerors through Him, not through our own best effort. It is that love that allows the policy of evil to do what it does. That sounds strange if you stop the sentence right there, doesn't it? I'm allowing the policy of evil to whack you because I love you. But it is. All the while, turning the attacks around and giving us a present and an eternal benefit from them. That's all. Why? Why is that tied to His love? Because you know what He wants more than anything? He wants you to come up there and labor with Him in His business. And this is what gets you to do that. That's all stemming out of that love. And by the way, that's exactly what I was telling you when I talked about who shall separate us from the love of Christ. Do you remember what I told you that was about? That was about what He has provided. The provision is made for us out of His love for us as sons and daughters, that He desires to come and work with Him. And that's exactly what's being talked about here. Through Him that loved us. That's the kind of love that's being talked about there. Okay. Now I think that gets us through verse 37, and that's that last part, through Him that loved us. Is there any question about that verse?
That's where the old adage of everything that happens for the best.
It does for a son. It sure does. For a son or daughter, it does. Thank you. All things work together for good. Exactly what you're saying. Yes, Cliff.
The paragraph where they're talking about, what he's saying.
Sheep for the slaughter.
Did you say that was God's policy?
That was God.
Okay. And if it's not the policy of God, then why is He following that with we're more than conquerors? Because that's for the Son.
Exactly. Okay. That's a good question. Let me repeat it again so that folks on the DVD will follow this answer. If verse 36, let me start with 35 and follow. In 35, we're given those 7 categories of attacks. And then in verse 36, he quotes Psalm 44:22, we are killed all the day long, we are counted as sheep for the slaughter, right? And so those attacks, the reason when he says as it is written, and he quotes that, let me just put it up here like this, sheep for the slaughter. I think I'm right. I'm almost writing off of the screen here, so I got to watch it. This is the attacks. He's going to go back to Israel's program where they are not sons, and that's not the attack from the policy of evil. It is God doing it. But the only thing He's after, Clifford, is their attitude as they underwent that. That's all He's after. And when he sums that up,
That's not the attitude they have for this.
that's exactly the point he's going to make. The attitude they had is the very opposite attitude that you're supposed to have because you are a son. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Good question. I'm glad you said that. Gave me a chance to clarify that. Their attitude is, where are you? Yeah, poor us. Remember, they charged God with, why sleepest thou? Can you imagine telling God, are you asleep? That's kind of nervy.
they didn't have any other way to respond.
No, they didn't have any sonship that would carry them differently.
That was the way they were taught to respond because that was the way God was doing it.
That's right. That's right. They didn't, Mark is saying, they didn't really have another way to respond. You realize there were some, remember we brought this up, think of Daniel. Daniel stayed faithful to the Lord the whole time, right? If you're Daniel, wouldn't you kind of be thinking, wait a minute, why is this happening to me? Remember what they said? We haven't dealt deceitfully in your covenant. We haven't strayed from your path. There were some people in Israel that were saying, hey, we've been doing the right thing. Why are these things happening to us? We're not the bad guys. So, yes, that's the only way they really could respond. By the way, you tell me, when bad things start happening to save people today, what is the normal response to that? Yeah, oh, God, please, what? Oh, why, why is this happening to me? I don't... Hey, I've even bargained with God in those old systematic days. I've even said, God, you know I love you. You know I serve. Why is it? I'd even ask.
We're always counseling the Psalms of Job to
I know. That was the old counsel. Mark is saying we were counseled to go over to Job and look at all the tribulations that Job underwent and all that. Let me tell you what, that is a bad place for a member of the body of Christ in the dispensation of grace to try to go get comfort for the things that are happening. That is not working that way. That's a whole different ball game. Okay, any other questions about verse 37? This is a great discussion on this verse. You think you got it nailed down?
It's still in context of 28.
It's still in the context of all of that. Right. In fact, when he says, in all these things, you could not just limit that to the 7 categories of attacks. You could go up above and talk about those other questions even. Who shall separate us from the love? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? Who is he that condemns? You could go back and, hey, in all of it.
Go back to we're talking about all things, back to 28.
Exactly right. Take it all the way back to 28.
Whether it's suffering for this present time.
Oh, that's so good. I wish you quit stealing my sermon. No. No, you're exactly right, because you have 2 different kinds of sufferings going on. You have the sufferings of this present time, and then you have the sufferings under the policy of evil. And can't they look just like each other? Absolutely. So, and we're going to talk about that twofold attack deal today as well. Okay, if there's not anything else about 37, I'm going to move us into 38. Are we ready? Okay. Because I think, well, let me just put it up here. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Oh, good. We have 50 seconds left. Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I want you to look at this, just before we take our break. Look at now, remember there were 7 categories of attacks. But when you look at this list, there's 10 things in this list. Is there anything you notice about this list? And I will tell you right off the bat, this is not just a repeating of the 7 things. That's not what this is supposed to be. Huh? Okay, it takes you into the heavenly places. That's a very good observation. Mark? Okay, it covers the whole scope of what could happen. Just look at the list and don't try to think about what those things are so much. Do you see any patterns in that list? That's all I'm after before we take our break. Oh, Lord, I got to get that. Do you see any patterns? Neither nor. Okay, don't just look for repetition. Let me ask you that. Do you see any groupings? Okay. All right. Now look. Death and life. Okay. Does angels, principalities and powers, okay. Things present and to come. Depth. And I'm going to put that together with that, and I'm going to now do you see any pattern? Now you've seen some groupings. Do you see how those things go together? These are all the angelic realm. You see this? This kind of sums up your life, doesn't it? Things present, things to come. Oh, I'm just going to go too long on this, so we'll talk about it after the break. Height, depth. I know any other creature, I can see where you might want to throw that down into a separate. But look at those groupings. Do you see any patterns? You have 2, 3, 2, and 3. That doesn't mean anything to you yet, does it? Okay. Here's what we'll do. We'll take our break, and we'll come back. And here's what I need you to do. I need you to understand what these 10 things are, because once you understand what they are, this is all going to make... These are very specific. And we're going to go through them, and I want you